Hello everyone, we're here today with you for another edition of Scheibs Vibes, and it's a pleasure for me today to have here the retired Territorial Music Secretary and Bandmaster of the New York Staff Band, Ron Waiksnoris. Welcome, Ron. It's great to have you here.
Thank you.
And we've got an assortment of questions to ask Ron, I think primarily about his days in the Salvation Army, but we may also talk about a few other endeavors that he's taken on through the years. And I think you'll enjoy listening to this broadcast. We'll start out talking about Ron's family. I think many of our listeners would probably know that his parents were Salvation Army officers. But I'd still like to know if you could tell us about your early days in the Salvation Army, perhaps some other information about your family, where, perhaps the different places you grew up, and where and when you started to play the cornet.
Well, Tom, it's nice to be here. My story would start in Western Massachusetts, and I have memories in Auburn, New York, and I realized I left there after kindergarten, so that's a pretty good memory from a long time ago.
It is, yeah.
But I was allowed to play the bass drum in whatever that core band would have been in those days. At kindergarten, so I'm assuming there was not much there if they were letting me play the drum. But I got caught up, I think, at that point. My interest started in music, and then we moved to Buffalo Citadel for first grade, and that was a great corps. That was, I want to say, kind of English-based idea, 30-piece brass band. This guy Kington was the bandmaster, and pretty sure he was an Englishman. And
now that would have been the days after Herb Thomas's father
it would
was
have
there.
been
Would he still have been around? Or
recently after Gene Thomas. He was still there.
He's still
absolutely.
alive. Yeah. Okay.
And of course Herb's dad had played percussion in the staff band,
right.
And we would hear those stories. So I'm a little kid, but as a Corps officer's kid, you tend to be stuck. You're not driving yourself home or whatever, so I would drink in all of this band stuff because I just loved it. And my uncle, Bill Eckberg, was the YP band leader, Young People's band leader, and I begged him for a cornet, let me learn to play. And he did the typical, oh, you're much too young, we don't start.
Oh, you would have only been about 6 or 7 at the time, probably, right? Okay.
But he gave me a cornet, and so I started playing, and I can remember doing crazy things, Tom, like my parents would leave me home, probably with my sister, and I would try to play through the whole band tune book in first, second grade, trying to do that. And I didn't realize that would be unusual for a kid to want to spend that amount of time playing. But I really enjoyed playing. And during that time in Buffalo, we left after after third grade, but I was playing in the junior high orchestra, and that's when I first played Pomp and Circumstance for a graduation of the junior high, and I was in third grade. I guess that's pretty unusual.
Well, that shows how advanced some Salvation Army kids are because of that training way before, I bet you, any other kids in the school, and we've seen that. I've seen that with my own kids through the years, so that's a really neat thing, I think.
So a lot of fun, and so I have nothing but great memories of Buffalo. And you talk about Herb Thomas. He was actually my crossing guard at Public School 53. Herb was in 8th grade, I think, and I was in third grade, but he was on the safety patrol. So I have a lot of history from my Buffalo days.
And you maintain your friendship with Herb to this very day, actually,
Absolutely.
Right? Which is a great thing.
Yeah.
Now, how about the rest of your family in terms of your brother and your sisters? Were they musically involved as well, pretty much?
Yeah, we were kind of a musical family. My mom was a very fine pianist, and my dad was really a good vocal soloist. He was one of those preachers that in the middle would break into a song that I can remember things like Balm in Gilead or things that would be very effective.
And of course, a violin player as well.
And, in those days, he only played the violin for fun. He would get it out and do silly things and make us laugh. And we thought he had no interest in that because he was a pretty good brass player, but he grew up Catholic, got saved in the Army, goes to training, and realizes everybody's playing brass instruments. So Bill Berry taught him to play a brass instrument in the training college.
Oh, okay.
And again, he just ran with it, and that's Gus and Bill Berry's father, Bill Berry. So, and there's a connection because I've been friends with their kids all these years.
That's right, yeah. Great. Well, I think you've actually answered some of the questions that I had in my second one here, which it was, where was your first organized band? And it was probably, well, we could say Auburn, New York, but I think probably Buffalo was a little more organized than that. Yeah. And then playing at school, in school, as young as third grade. Now, let's just maybe veer off the track a little bit and ask you, did that experience playing in school so young benefit you later on during school in terms of things you were able to participate in?
Well, I think so, because I was able later to do regional and all-state band and things like that, which were very enjoyable and really put you in the picture. It's kind of easy to be, well, maybe not for everybody, but I found it easy to be the best player in the high school band, but then you get to the all-state group and you realize, wow, there's a lot of really good players, which is a good thing to find out and to make relationships with those kids.
I guess that would have been the time you guys had moved on to Massachusetts, perhaps?
Yes, really. My formative years were in Springfield, Massachusetts, and we moved there in 1957 when I was going into fourth grade. And believe it or not, we stayed there till I graduated from high school, which is very unusual for a Corps officer's stint in any one appointment. So I was really blessed to just grow up in one town. We moved to a little town called Longmeadow, which is right near Springfield. And again, I think my dad was always looking out for the best educational opportunity. It was probably the smallest quarters in the division, but we were in the best place for music education. My band director at Longmeadow was the principal oboe in the Springfield Symphony. Okay. So any marching band stuff we did was only what was required. We were really working on classically trained kind of music, so it was good. And
in the Salvation Army at Springfield, there was a good band there at that time as well, I understand,
yes,
right?
Absolutely great people. It was very much working class, but they were fabulous, and they helped me. They took me under their wing. Bandmaster Nicholas was a Canadian that had come down, and he did both the band and the songsters, and he could be an absolute definition of faithfulness and encouragement, and that was a good time in my life to be there with people. You would know the Childs family, and Harold Childs was our Corchiatic guardian and YP band leader, and always happy, always smiling, always had a joke. And there are also people like, well, Lucy Jordan is a Childs, and she was a pianist and a soloist, and then Les Jordan, we call Skip, again, a happy, encouraging person. So those were really good years for me.
Good. Well, not long after that, you moved on in terms of finishing high school and college days. And a little bit later, you actually became a member of the Cambridge, Massachusetts Citadel Silver Band. And that was a well-known band in New England for a long time until about the 1980s. Now, can you tell us how you joined that band and share with us some of the performance highlights of playing in that group, and also highlight some of the fine musicians that came through the ranks of that band?
That was a really unique experience. The Cambridge phenomenon, when the band really got quite good, was during the Vietnam War time. So you had some people in there that had gone to Vietnam and made it back, and then you had some that were staying in school to avoid being drafted. You had some people in the military, and then you would have people studying at Harvard or teaching at MIT. It was a very interesting group, and people that would give you the shirt off their back, would do anything for you. You know, the reputation was that it was more than a few hooligans in the band, because that was the era of long hair and beards and all that, which now has become commonplace. I feel unusual because I don't have a beard. So.
And I think the war had an effect, on everything that was happening then as
everything.
well.
The country, you think the country is a bit divided now. During the Vietnam time, there were protests everywhere all the time, and a lot of difficult times. So things aren't as bad now as they were then. But we had this group that really loved to play, and there was a lot of officers' kids, and we had, when I joined, we had a very fine bandmaster by the name of Evan Cameron, and Evan had come to the area. He was a Midwesterner, come to the area to study at Harvard, and he was working on a doctorate at Boston University at the time, and we also had John Stubbings, who had gotten a master's at Harvard and was also getting a master's at MIT, and I could go into how smart he is and the things that he was able to do in our lives, but a great guy. And so there were highlights that we played 3 times a Sunday. So I learned repertoire in Cambridge because we played so much. Sunday morning, open air in the afternoon, where we'd do kind of a little concert at Central Square, and then the evening meeting. So we would be playing all the time. And then particularly when Bob Getz came, who followed Evan Cameron, he was big on learning the repertoire. And we played big pieces and smaller pieces, but we learned so much. That's really where I began to look at scores, and I was his deputy for a while, and thinking about all the fantastic Salvation Army music that we have. But during those days, we had Eric Ball visit and work with the band for a weekend, and I can remember a moment when he had us, I want to say chant, but he had us repeat, I am one with eternal God. And those of us that know about Eric Ball, or knew Eric Ball a little bit, as we did, would know his spiritual life was so important. So just a moment like that made it worth playing in that band. But we also played at reenactment of landing at Plymouth Rock with Billy Graham, and we marched down the street.
I've never
in
heard about
Plymouth.
that. That's great.
And I remember that because I was as close to Billy Graham as I am to you now, and that was really quite something. Again, a spiritual moment, because in those days we had a lot of maybe less than spiritual moments, more fellowship, shall we say.
Yeah.
So when you had these strong spiritual moments, they were really memorable. But we had great players. My good friend John Appleby was in the military band, the Army band at Fort Devens at that time. And John was a fabulous player, could really, had great technique and great knowledge of brass bands. He also had the best stereo system you'll ever know, with his giant Bozak speakers and Macintosh amplifier, and I think I probably lost a lot of hearing listening to brass band records with John. But again, that was formative. We listened to Black Dyke and Grimethorpe and everything we could over and over and over until we really assimilated what that style of music is.
The best story from that, I think I could tell you, is I know Bob Getz lived on the 3rd floor above where the music was being played, and up there he could tell not only the piece of music, but which band was playing it.
That's probably
it was
true.
so loud. So, I think he said that from time to time. But
so it was fantastic. But there were also players like Phil Dittmer, and a lot of people don't know Philip Dittmer. He was the oldest son of Stanley Dittmer, and he was a fabulous player. And then Steve Bulla also came up to study at Berkeley at that time, and he was in the band. Don Kittle, who recently has gone to glory, was the bass trombonist. A fella that might have been forgotten, Wally, I'm forgetting, Crouch, Wally Crouch.
Oh, yeah. Okay, euphonium player?
Euphonium player.
Yeah.
And he was, I think, a protege of Cat Linné, and he and Cat Linné's son were great buddies and great players, but he came to play in the Cambridge band and would play solos like nobody's business. Fabulous player. So we had those, and then we had some, shall we say, very ordinary players, which is typical of a Salvation Army Corps band. The one thing that was unusual, it was an all-male band at that time, and the only other one around in our territory like that was the staff band.
And another player who came in to kind of break that all-male banding tradition was Nancy Sampson, right? And,
Yeah, wonderful musician.
great musician through the
But
years.
that was actually after my time. So,
Okay, yep.
yeah.
That was kind of a time you left and I went there. There was probably a gap in between, and that's probably the time that Nancy joined the band, I would think, maybe
Yeah.
1976 or
Something like that.
around that.
Yeah.
But then, through the years after that, some very other fine lady musicians were in the group. Someone like B. Holtz for a time played in it.
Yeah, and
Debbie
the
Birchall.
band traveled to England, did a tour
Right.
of the UK,
That's right.
played in the Albert Hall.
Yeah, and that was thanks to Eric Ball, I think. We did a profile festival back in around 1979, I guess, and he recommended the band to to Norman Bearcroft in particular, probably, and so that's why
Yeah.
we got that tour, which was great. It was
Fantastic.
really
Yeah.
memorable. So,
Yeah.
good. Well, thank you for all of those insights into the band there. Now, we'll head back a little bit to 1974 when you were married to Carol Lee. And I put on my notes here, I was there. I don't know if you remember
Yes,
that,
I
but
do,
I
yeah.
was there. And then moved with her to the New York area in 1975 to work here in the Territorial Music Department and to play in the New York Staff Band. Now, you, as you've said, had a great time in Boston, really, and did good work there. But could you share with us the circumstances that led to the move to New York for you?
Well, I knew sort of all the guys from the staff band from Star Lake, and really it happened because Phil Smith won a job in Chicago with the
right.
Chicago Symphony, and there was an opening on the solo cornet bench, and I guess they thought I would be okay with that. I'd been playing principal cornet in Cambridge and was known from Star Lake, so I would never say I replaced Phil Smith, but in a sense, there was an opening that was there because he left. So a job was offered working with publications. And at the time, Tom Mack was the music secretary, and my good friend Lambert Bittinger was also in the department. So it was basically the three of us, and those were great days.
Great. Well, you worked there beginning in, I believe, like I said, 1975, and stayed there for a few years. All in all, working for the Salvation Army in music and development, your work total was probably over 40 years, I think. I don't know if you
Yes.
figured out the exact number, but you actually took a break for a short time to work outside the Salvation Army in the early 1980s. I think a lot of people might not remember that. I do, because you've told me some stories about it.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if you could tell us all about that experience.
Sure. Well, backing up to the Cambridge days, one of the great players in the band was Sven Youngholm.
Oh, yeah.
And Sven had played in the Chicago staff band, the New York staff band, the Melbourne staff band. And then he showed up in Cambridge and became our principal trombone. And he was playing very well in those days. But he was in the travel business. While he was in Cambridge, I want to say he was one of the first guys involved with a company called Price Club. And
Okay.
he would set up tours for people to Hawaii and things like that. And then around 1978, 79, I guess it was the end of 78, after the Congress and all those things, I had gone with Carolee and Steve Bulla on a little European tour, including Stockholm, and saw a few sites. And Sven, around that time, became president of a company called Scandinavia Overseas Services, and it was a wholesale travel company. So they would put together tours and then sell them to travel agents.
Okay.
And so Sven one night says, "Why don't you come and work for me?" So I was very happy doing what I was doing, playing in the staff band. Derek Smith was my hero, and I was getting to play under his leadership with friends like Lambert Bittinger, who many know we used to call him Butch.
Yep.
And in those days, that's who he was. In my first year, Olaf Lundgren, I sat next to him. I was sort of living the dream. But then, as Sven described the job, "I'll pay you a certain amount," which was considerably more than I was making. And our offices are on Madison Avenue. And okay, so I thought, well, let me give it a try. So I actually took a leave of absence, which is allowed.
Okay.
I didn't quit my job. I took a leave and went to work for this Scandinavian tour company. And I learned so much. I'm really glad that I did that. I learned a lot about business. I learned a lot about people. I learned a lot about life outside the shelter of the Salvation Army environment that was the only one I knew as a working person.
Sure.
And got to do a lot of great things. Like I would take groups of travel agents on a little trip. So we'd start in New York and go to Copenhagen and go all to the Tivoli Gardens and the best restaurants and look at the hotels so that they could sell them. And then we'd move on. We'd take an overnight cruise to Oslo, do the same thing there. Then maybe take a train to Stockholm and show them the sights. And then do an overnight to Helsinki, do the same, and fly home. And then maybe I'd be home for a couple of weeks and do it all over again. So it was great in the beginning. And I'm eternally grateful for Sven to give me the opportunity because maybe other than having some innate skills, I was not prepared for such a prestigious job as being a sales manager for a Madison Avenue company. But after about 10 or 11 months, I think I had lived 3 years of time.
It was pretty intense.
It was incredible.
You were away from home a lot, I guess.
Yeah, incredibly intense. And so at that point, it was time to go back to what I knew and loved. But I'll never regret that time in the travel industry because it taught me a lot, just a lot, living life in a different way.
And when you went back to the Army, I think you went back into development for a time, didn't you?
I did. Charlie Olson, who was a staff band guy, was running the development department, and I was his assistant. And again, learned a lot of things that now come in handy with what I'm doing these days.
Good. Well, let's go on a little bit. And I recall visiting the UK territory with you on tour when you were the staff band's deputy bandmaster and cornet soloist in 1985. And you, I think, would be one of the relatively few Salvationist musicians who have performed as a soloist on the cornet solo, The Amazing Mr. Lightson, arranged by Peter Graham, in the Royal Albert Hall. Now, can you tell me what that was like?
Yeah, it's a journey, Tom. I can remember, I want to say 6 months before, Derek Smith came to me and said they're looking for an outline of a program for the Albert Hall, and they would like us to feature a soloist. And he said, would you be interested in being our soloist that night?
Okay.
So, sure.
So that's how it came about.
6 months out, yep, sure. So then Peter Graham says, I'll write you a solo.
Okay.
And I said, okay. And then Peter writes The Amazing Mr. Lightson, and I say, well, who do you think's going to play this? And he said, oh, you can do it. And
and he based that on, I think, a rendition that a guy from over in Scotland used to play.
Yeah, I don't think I ever met him. Jackie Spowert, I think, was his name. Yeah,
that's right. I remember that.
Yeah. So we practiced it and played it out, and I made it work, and we recorded it. I think it came out pretty well.
Yep.
And then we were getting ready to go, and I remember going to the airport and thinking, okay, I have 10 days before I have to play this solo. And then I kind of counted down 9 days, 8 days. And, of course, it got better as we went along. You get more confident.
You got to play it almost every night on tour, I guess.
Pretty much every night, so I was pretty confident. And then the day comes, you wake up that morning and you're thinking, okay, God, if ever you were going to help me, now's the time. So then you get there, and it's a full house, and the ISB is there, and the ISS, and then finally the introduction starts, and it's about time to play, and off you go. And it went very well, and Gordon Ward, who was my friend for years and years in the band, we had kind of a deal, because it ends on a written E.
Right.
And I said, look, you just have to cover me, because if I do this whole thing and miss the last note... So I may have hit the last note, but he hit it really well.
Mm-hmm.
And Stedman Allen did the write-up for the musician that said I hit a clear
Perfect.
final note after a good performance. So
And
that's
you haven't told anybody else that all these years.
no.
probably, right?
So now the
There you
whole
go.
world knows I owe my Royal Albert Hall life to Gordon Ward. But then when it was over and I sat down, I looked over at the ISB, and it was so much. It was really cool because you're relieved it's over.
Yeah.
And Ray Bowes was giving me the thumbs up, and Derek Kane was giving me the thumbs up.
Yeah.
And I kind of got the impression I had just joined a very unique and
Yeah.
elite club.
Yeah, that's great. Well, the thing is, I think it's great that you can remember it still to this very day, probably all those things. So
Yeah.
that's a wonderful experience. Well, you remained as the cornet soloist of the staff band when Brian Bowen took over the band as bandmaster in 1986. Now, although that situation ultimately did not work out in the end, what were some of the positive and useful things that you would have gleaned under his leadership?
Well, I was always impressed with Brian's music. Before I met him, I loved his music. He has a unique voice. Today a lot of the writers kind of copy each other, and you get the same kind of slow, fast, or fast, slow, fast kind of piece. And
Well, I know you don't follow Facebook that much, but it's interesting. There was just something on where he was kind of like self-deprecating his own music because that's something that comes out sometimes. But a whole bunch of people came out and said, Brian, if I could have written one of the pieces that you would have done, like My Comfort and Strength or something else, I would feel fulfilled. So I think he gets that support, which is a good thing.
so it was a real treat musically to spend time with him. But he entered into a very difficult situation when you say it didn't work out. He came from very disciplined international staff band to a New York staff band environment, which I spent years trying to change. But there was a lot of silliness, shall we say, that went on that he just didn't understand. What's so funny about whatever was going on? On the bus, he was fine. He'd laugh like everybody else with things, and we can go into various reasons why there was humor there, but in rehearsal he wanted people focused, and it was never good enough. And I thought that was interesting that he never gave up, which I think is important. And nothing was ever cheap. He would never let things be cheap. I can remember him coming over and quietly talking to me about just play it straight. I think that would be better. Where I was trying to maybe do something cute. Or again, he would come over and say, I understand what you're doing. It's sort of idiomatic, but that's really not what's on the page. Why don't we play exactly what's on the page? And wow, that taught me a lot, that he had high standards. And I think the band played really well under Brian. If you go back to the recordings during his time, I think the band, he did miracles with some quite average players.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. Very good answer. Now, following Brian, your tenure as New York Staff Band bandmaster lasted a record 24 years, from its start in 1992 until your retirement in 2016. Now, I want to just limit you a little bit here because we could probably go on for hours with a few things here, but I want you to see if you could share perhaps the 3 most memorable highlights of your leadership of the band during that time.
Wow, yeah, that's very difficult. But let me say 2 of them would center around Carnegie Hall, and one a visit to a country. So
Okay.
Elton John had just done a special event in England with the Black Dyke Band, where he sang "Abide with Me," and they accompanied him. And he was coming to New York to be a part of the Save the Rainforest event that happens every year.
Yes.
And he wanted to do that again. And luckily, whoever he talked to at Black Dyke suggested the New York Staff Band could accompany him. So we went through a rigmarole, typical Salvation Army, where some people think, well, he's a secular guy and we're not sure about his lifestyle and this, that, and the other thing, and maybe we shouldn't do that. And then I would get calls and visits from various bandsmen. We're going to do this, right? I mean, we have to do this. And others, we're not going to do this, are we? We really can't be doing this. So made a huge impression as a young bandmaster at that time. How do you do the right thing? But ultimately, with some help from Colonel Israel Gaither, who was the chief at the time, and Larry Moretz, it was decided there's a lot of reasons why we should do it. And so we did, and it was spectacular. I can remember asking if there were any complimentary tickets I could have, and they said it's sold out, and the cheapest ticket was $500.
Oh, that's great.
So we didn't get any comps. But we played Abide With Me. We accompanied Elton in that, and he was really easy to work with, and that was a tremendous memory. And they let us print in the program some things that the Salvation Army does to help the rainforest and other third world things that we're involved in. So that helped the Army. And we marched in from the back playing Onward Christian Soldiers, and then accompanied Elton. And I would say that experience, that was very similar to a packed out Royal Albert Hall experience. Because I would say the ISB 120, but I only have 3 things, so I'm not going to mention that. But that was pretty good.
I just want to tag on to what you're saying in terms of that handout that was included in the program. I think that was a really smart and a good compromise there. And what impressed me at the time, too, was I think there was a decision made not to do it at first, but the powers that be switched their thinking when they heard some other thought behind it. And it's good to see that, I think. Sometimes
it's a sign
you don't
of good
see
leadership
that.
when you can change your mind, change your decision.
Yeah. Okay, well, what would number 2 be then?
Number 2 would be our 120th, or was it 125th concert that we did at Carnegie Hall.
125th,
The 125th. And I never really had a bucket list, but that was the one thing that would have been on my bucket list, was to do our own concert at Carnegie Hall. And through the years, sometimes visiting people that you'd show around the city that would say, well, you know, what haven't you done that you'd like to do? And that was always it. So that was really special, that we could feature the future All-Stars around that, but that we had so many composers write for us, especially for that night, and that they showed up. And the ministry of the band was strong. We were fortunate to get the King's Singers, and a lot of people came that night to hear the King's Singers, but ended up hearing the New York Staff Band, and they heard the King's Singers sing Salvation Army music. And then, of course, we had the younger Philip Cobb then play with us, which was a treat. That young man is just a fantastic player. And then the little surprise that I had cooked up with Phil Smith coming over after his New York Philharmonic concert to play Quicksilver. And Phil whispered to me that the stagehands were not happy, that they weren't aware that he was going to play. And he said, you might get a little extra bill, I don't know. So I just laughed and said, who cares, let's play. So those are the little things that are spoken on stage sometimes that nobody hears.
I had never heard that. That's interesting. Well, I want to say I enjoyed that as well, because I had something to do with the logistics of that, especially obtaining Carnegie Hall when we could only get one certain date, and then eventually finding out we were going to pay $25,000 for it at the time, you know. But again, I'm glad leadership supported that, and it really was a special night. If you think about the King Singers, I had a chance to interact with them, taking them around a bit. So that was a really good memory.
Well, and then, just to extend that a little bit, the future All-Stars, we brought out all the people that had come, the special people that had come for the event, and had them conduct the band. So they had Norman Bearcroft and Peter Graham, and who else did we have there? I guess Phil Smith, Derek Smith. So they had a special time as well, Bill Himes. So it was that was a great memory. And the third one, I want to say the ISB 120, but that would be third and a half, the visit to Cuba. Again, my age group, our age group, we grew up with Fidel Castro and all the issues with Cuba and communism and all of that. And to be able to go and find out there's a Salvation Army there's a number of corps, and they're joyful Salvationists, was a fantastic thing. So that was a privilege that I won't forget, and I would say that's probably number 3 on my highlight list.
Well, you think about it, we were both in the band in the 1970s, and if you would have said to one of us then, this band is going to go visit Cuba someday, you said, you're crazy. This isn't going to happen, right?
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
So, just to share in that. And it's hard to believe that was, like 4 years ago now, I guess, already. Time continues to fly by.
It does,
right?
yeah.
But, that was a great experience. Well, let's go on to the present band a bit. Derek Lance has, in my opinion, done a tremendous job in succeeding you as staff bandmaster during the first 3 years of his tenure, having taken part in and organizing a tour of Japan and a joint concert recently with perhaps the #1 brass band in the world, the Corey Band. Now, I know you talk with Derek on a regular basis still, which is a great thing. I just ask, what advice would you give him to continue to have success in this way?
Well, I would say pray a lot. When I took over the band, which was not a pleasant experience, I can remember coming back to my office and sitting down, and I prayed. And I said, Lord, if you send the players, I'll do my best to make the band work. And so I would say to Derek, keep doing that. I know he's a praying man. Do that. Do your best to relate to people. There's no way that you're going to please everybody, which can be difficult. So you need to have some thick skin. But I think the biggest challenge is relating to the modern Salvation Army. I would say at the training college, mostly what they would do in worship would be praise and worship songs. I think officers' councils, it's the same thing. So the Army culture is kind of disappearing. It's turning into something else. And I think it'd be tragic if this great thing that's gone on for over 100 years with singing songs written by Salvationists and playing music written by Salvationists, on brass instruments particularly, which is a unique thing. I would hate to see that disappear, but I think that's going to be a challenge for him. But if anybody's up to the task, it's Derek Lance. I don't know anybody that works any harder or smarter. He'll put everything he's got into it. And you've got to do what you need to do for the day. So I don't have particular advice for him other than try to enjoy the people that come his way, be an encourager, and keep doing all the spectacular events and things that he's doing for the territory and for the band.
It's interesting you mentioned about the training school and what happens there. You recall when you were here, you and I both for quite a few years taught a class, and I'm continuing to do that.
Good. The
beginner/intermediate brass class.
Yes.
And you look for things that hopefully bode well for the future. And I've got a class of about 5 or 6 this year that is pretty much just learning. But they're so enthusiastic about it, they stay after class to play and practice after I leave, even. So
great. That's good news, Tom. That's really good.
Yeah. And so, like you said, try to be encouraging, certainly. But hopefully some of these guys will have a spark and certainly gain appreciation of all the different types of music we have to use.
Well, the other trick is to make sure you send bandsmen to the training college. There was one time when the whole cabinet had been associated with the staff band, either as executive officers or players, and that was a very helpful time. So keep trying that.
Yep. All right, well, we're going to finish up with one final area. Since you've retired as music secretary and staff bandmaster, you've taken on a new part-time job in the development department in the New Jersey division, and also have accepted the position of conductor of Imperial Brass, which is a northern New Jersey-based non-Salvation Army brass band. What are the challenges and rewards associated with each of these opportunities?
Well, with my part-time job, the biggest challenge is keeping it part-time. I try to work 3 days a week, but it's often 5 or 6. But I'm really enjoying it. It's a very different thing. I work with advisory board people, and I'm called the community representative now. So I'm trying to connect people to the Army and the Army to people. For instance, in a couple of weeks, I have a meeting with the CEO of the New Jersey Performing Arts NJ PAC and Center, I guess that is. And they're in the middle of a $175 million capital campaign. And they're going to build an education building adjacent to NJ PAC. And they've already built a housing unit and restaurant across the street. So they're involved with renewing Newark, which has been a huge effort. So I'm looking forward to meeting with him. But these are things that I learned early on. You have to build relationships. So I started by writing to him to see if we could have a quartet play before the Nutcracker performance, have some Army brass players and a kettle outside and in the lobby, and he agreed to that. The reason I got that is our board chair is the vice chair of Prudential, and anything I can think up, he can open the door. And I enjoy that because, a cold call just doesn't work. But if you have someone who is connected or who's a friend. So these are big numbers, $175 million campaign, and they have $100 million in. And so I'm hoping that he can connect us to a lot of things, but that he can help with our music and arts programs, and whether it's scholarships for our kids to the NJ PAC program or whatever. So there's that I've enjoyed very much and am enjoying. And then I put some effort into the New Jersey Devils.
Right, I was going to say you've done some things with the Prudential Center there, haven't you?
And so that's been good. And I can remember one night I was sitting in a luxury suite in the Prudential Center, enjoying some food and watching the Devils play hockey. And it dawned on me that the staff band was in Lancaster or somewhere, and I thought, where would I rather be tonight? But that's just a little aside. I probably would rather be with the band, but just to say that a lot of good things are happening in the Army because of our advisory board people and because of people that really support us. And unique thing in Newark is that we have a Boys and Girls Club, which is in our territory is very unique. But we have really passionate board members, and there are a lot of good things happening that way.
I was going to say, Prudential Center, I think it may have been before you had taken on this job, but we got to go there with the Montclair Band once and play the national anthem. And the funny thing I remember, I was conducting because Charlie was away. We had to play music between the second and third periods. And so they asked, could you play music while the highlights are being shown? So we played Feliz Navidad 2 or 3 times while the hockey players were going down the ice and that kind of stuff. And it was great, though. It really worked out well. So that was a fun time.
Funny story, too. I arranged for us to get the 50-50. People gamble on that night.
Sure.
But it's not a gamble for us, is the way I explained it to the DC.
Yeah.
That, no, we're guaranteed we're going to get half of what people give. So we did that this year. And strangely enough, I had the sales guy, one of the 50-50 sellers, come up to our suite and say, hit these guys up because they all want to support. Sure. And one of the board members won. So we got 100%. They donated their money. So that was good. But no, I've really enjoyed that. And a couple of weeks ago, I had coffee with Lindsay Berra, who's the granddaughter of Yogi Berra. And just to hear some fantastic stories about the old Yankees. Yeah. Her dad, Yogi's first son, is actually a Red Sox fan because back when he was a little boy, he would bother Mickey Mantle and the other guys, and Yogi would say, why don't you go over to the Red Sox dugout and bother Ted? And so he became friends with Ted Williams and sort of his little mascot. So now if you run into Larry Berra, Yogi's eldest son, you'll often see him wearing a Red Sox cap.
Wow. Okay, I never heard that. That's terrific. Well, let's go on to the other part of the question. How about your association with Imperial Brass? Tell us about that.
Well, that has been sort of a godsend. I really felt it was time for me to finish with the New York Staff Band. Sometime you just sense, I always wanted to finish well, and I wanted to make sure the band had a good chance to keep going, and I had sort of done what I could. I really felt it was time to finish. And then Mark Free heard about that and asked me if I would take on Imperial Brass, which I was very familiar with. And I thought about it a bit and thought that would be just right. So this is my 4th season with Imperial, which may be a record with that group, actually.
I think
They've
so.
been notorious for changing their conductors.
Yeah.
But Mark passed away a couple of years ago, which was a huge disappointment to me because I was so enjoying spending time with Mark Free. And as you know very well, Mark did demand a lot of time, but it was great. He had so many stories. He knew everybody associated with brass playing, particularly in New York, and had a tremendous passion for that band particularly. So we're missing Mark. We did do a big tribute concert to him, which went very well, and all of that. But it's a challenge. The band has a lot of technique, and what they don't have is history, tradition of brass band playing. So we're working to try to get some brass band concepts. But they're a wonderful group to work with, and I'm enjoying that. That's been a real treat for me, and something that I think I needed, and I'm glad I have, and I'm still enjoying that. We're getting ready to play at the Mid-Atlantic Brass Band Festival, and then in June we're playing at the Gettysburg Band Festival.
Okay.
And so there are good things on the horizon there.
Well, it's good. I think some of the things I've seen is that now after Mark's passing, some other people in the group are picking up the mantle in terms of organization and leadership. And to be honest, I think if that didn't happen, it probably would make life more difficult. But it seems like there are young guys who are into the band and are doing a good job doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they're doing very well.
Good. Well, thank you, Ron. I think we've had a great chat here. I think that you've covered a wide range of topics that'll be of interest to people listening to this broadcast. So thanks for coming in. We've been friends for a long time. It's probably close to 50 years now, and it's hard to believe. I'm going to do an interview with Charlie for Brass Band World in a little while, and it's the same type of situation. So he's going to be featured in that. Just a brief preview of something that's going to be upcoming. But thank you again for coming in, and as always, it's great to be with you.
My pleasure. Thanks for asking.